Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora koutou. Mr Chair, the purpose of this bill and the act that it seeks to extend is clearly about victims, compensating victims, and indeed that's appropriate. Victims suffer loss of property, they suffer physical damage, they suffer emotional or mental injury, and it's appropriate they should be compensated for that. And we in the Greens would be very happy to support a piece of legislation that was effective in compensating victims for wrongs done to them. Which begs a question, and a question I'd like to pose to the Minister, or indeed any of his government colleagues who'd like to comment. How many people, how many individual victims have received compensation in the 5 years that this bill has been that this legislation has been in place? How much money have those people received? Ballpark figures. Approximately how many victims have actually benefited, and to what extent have they benefited? Fairly simple question, but it would be an interesting one to hear. We've had quite a lot of activity around corrections in the year, in fact. One can certainly not accuse the Minister for Corrections of being idle. We've seen legislation that's enabled the use of court cells as holding cells for sentenced prisoners, despite the fact that we know from UK and elsewhere that that's actually quite a dangerous mechanism that inevitably leads to reducing prisoners' access to rehabilitation, removing them from family, at worst making it difficult for them to be provided with basic adequate food and sanitation. We've seen an active move towards double bunking in our prisons. We now have prisons which were designed for a certain number of inmates carrying significantly more than that number of inmates, which inevitably is going to raise tension in prison, make them pot boilers. That is going to increase the likelihood of violence and more victimisation, both within and without those walls. We've seen 3 strikes legislation, which takes away the opportunity for judges to make considered judgments on individual cases, effectively takes away the mandate from judges and puts it into this House. Again, an imposition on people's rights to be heard fairly and properly in a court and to be sentenced by that court. We've seen the way open for private management of prisons, and once again we know from international experience that that will degrade the conditions within prisons. Inevitably the profit extracted from them will mean there are fewer services available to prisoners, there will be less staff, prisons will become more dangerous, more violent, less humane places. The Select Committee a week or so ago, the Law and Order Select Committee, was treated to a show and tell from the Minister and her CEO. We were demonstrated the equipment being given to guards to protect themselves: helmets, stab vest, heavy boots, batons, pepper sprays. This is the Minister's solution to more violent prisons, is equipment to defend, or rather to protect, the officers who have the unenviable job of going in after violence has broken out to try and clean up the mess, to try and resolve an incident that's already occurred. All of these are reflective of a very busy and active Minister, a very busy portfolio. But where is the legislation that would actually return some justice to victims of crime? In amongst all of these bills, these new policy moves, it's very difficult to see anywhere in that is going to contribute to the well-being of victims. We are all committed, we will, I'm sure, agree to seeing compensation given for harm done, but where is the proactive, where is the policy, where is the drive to find solutions to crime, to find solutions to victimhood, to recompense, to reduce the likelihood of reoffending and therefore the creation of more victims? We're simply not seeing it from this government. What we are seeing is activity, legislation, policies symptomatic of a view that prisoners should lose their rights, that they should be locked up for longer, that they should suffer tougher sentences, despite the evidence, the common sense assessment that those strategies will simply lead to more violent societies, less safe societies, and leave the victims of crime out on a very long limb with very little support, very little likelihood of recompense. Kia ora koutou.